These shocking historical photos have been published recently. Write in the comments which photo you like the most. Celesta Geyer posed as a cowgirl beside a horse, using a small platform that quietly shows how sideshow photos were staged for scale. She toured the United States for 20 years, then after a major health scare in 1950, lost 400 pounds and became a women's health advocate. On June 25, 1996, the Khobar Towers blast tore open a United States military housing complex in Saudi Arabia. 19 servicemen lost their lives and 498 people were injured. This rare photo shows the Martin B-26 Marauder bomber Gladys going down near Erkelenz, Germany on February 23, 1945. It belonged to the 497th Bombardment Squadron, and all 6 crewmen did not return from the mission. In 1934, this building in Manchuria housed the Russian Fascist Party, an exile group formed far from the Soviet border. The glowing sign and rooftop light make the scene look staged, but it shows how openly radical politics operated in Harbin before the Second World War. Jerry Shriver was a United States Green Beret in Vietnam, serving with a secret reconnaissance unit where he became known as Mad Dog. He was remembered for carrying unusual field gear and for the cold line, "I have them right where I want them," before he did not return from a mission in 1969. In Cherbourg in 1944, women accused of relations with German soldiers were shown in public after their heads were shaved. The photo captures a harsh side of liberation when accusation and public shame often came before any legal process. This photo shows 22-year-old Patricia Hearst leaving court in San Francisco on March 5, 1976, during one of America's strangest trials. Once known as a missing newspaper heiress, she was now accused of helping the Symbionese Liberation Army in a bank robbery. On Highway 80 in 1991, a retreating Iraqi convoy was hit during the final days of the Gulf War. The long trail of burned and abandoned vehicles became one of the conflict's most haunting and disputed images. This shows the Sultan's Palace in Zanzibar after the Anglo-Zanzibar War in 1896, often called the shortest war in recorded history. British ships ended the standoff in under an hour, replacing the ruler before much of the city could understand what had happened. In 1933, performer Leah Schwartz, known as Leah Graff, was placed on banker John Pierpont Morgan Jr.'s lap during a Wall Street hearing stunt. The photo became a national headline, but her later fate under Nazi rule makes this smiling moment feel strangely fragile. On June 22, 1941, German troops crossed the Soviet border as Operation Barbarossa began. The smoke in the distance marks the first hours of a campaign that turned Eastern Europe into the main front of the Second World War. In 1991, firefighters in Kuwait worked covered in crude oil while closing burning wells after more than 600 were set alight. The last well was capped in November, ending one of the most extreme oil fire cleanups ever photographed. On June 24, 1945, 2 Japanese officers attended the Soviet Victory Parade in Red Square, while Japan was still not at war with the Soviet Union. They stood there as Germany, Japan's ally, was being celebrated as defeated, making this one of the strangest diplomatic moments of the parade. In 1929, officials stacked seized liquor barrels into a giant tower during Prohibition in the United States. The strange monument showed how far the country went to enforce a ban that many people still tried to quietly break. In June 1945, these German Messerschmitt 262 night fighters sat captured at Schleswig-Jagel airfield after the surrender. Their nose radar antennas show how close jet night warfare came to arriving before the war ended. On April 9, 1968, a former First Lady offered quiet support to a civil rights leader's widow during his funeral. The image joined 2 women marked by public loss, meeting in one of the most tense weeks in modern American history. In 1945, a Mitsubishi Key 51 struck HMS Sussex and left a ghost-like outline on the ship's side. The plane had likely bounced off the water first, losing enough speed that the armor held. At Kechut Reservoir in Soviet Armenia, this flower-shaped spillway controlled overflow in 1984. Its strange petals were engineering, not decoration, giving water more edge to pour through at once. In 1939, workers rushed the Louvre's masterpieces out of Paris before the Second World War reached France. This statue, like the Mona Lisa, was hidden in the countryside so the museum's greatest treasures would not vanish with the city. In 1968, North Korea seized the USS Pueblo and forced its crew into public captivity. The men were held for 11 months, while the ship itself stayed in North Korean hands and remains there today. On October 14, 1964, Soviet leaders voted to remove Nikita Khrushchev after a quiet party coup. The raised hands around him captured a rare public image of a leader being pushed out by his own system. After the USS Pueblo was captured in 1968, North Korea staged photos of the crew to present them as defeated and cooperative. The men quietly turned the propaganda against their captors with hidden hand gestures, a small act of defiance during 11 months of captivity. In 1904, 29-year-old Winston Churchill was already a former soldier, war correspondent, and rising member of Parliament. That same year, he left the Conservative Party for the Liberals, a bold move that helped shape the political career he later became famous for. In March 1917, Austro-Hungarian stormtroops trained at Levico with a captured Italian Vickers gun, learning the enemy's own equipment before mountain assaults. The quiet field and snowy peaks hide the real purpose of the lesson: faster attacks, smaller assault groups, and new tactics for trench warfare. In the early 1930s, this large rural family gathered for a rare group photo, with several generations standing together near the barn. The youngest boy in overalls was one of 16 children, a quiet detail that turns the picture into a record of a whole household built around farm life. This studio card shows a burlesque illusion act built around a disappearing performer, a toy-like costume, and a small trained dog. The dark stage makeup and strange branding reflect an outdated entertainment world where shock, spectacle, and offensive caricature were openly sold as comedy. On June 4, 1928, the train of Zheng Zuolin, the powerful ruler of Manchuria, was struck near Huanggutun Railway Station in Shenyang. The secret attack by officers of Japan's Kwantung Army changed the balance of power in northeast China and became a warning sign of what would come next.
On March 22, 1955, the United States Navy flew this modified transport as a flying radar laboratory, with 4 radar sets under its wings. Its 15-foot mast could rise and lower in flight, carrying weather instruments that made the aircraft a test station in the sky. In 1916, a German soldier stood on the muddy road to the church in Étrecourt-Manoncourt, in the Somme region of France. At that moment, the village church was serving as a German field hospital, turning a quiet road into part of the frontline medical network. In London in the 1930s, a boy on roller skates used his dog for speed along a wet city street. The blurred legs show how fast they were moving, turning an ordinary walk into a risky street ride. This portrait shows Bill Doolin, the American outlaw who formed the Doolin-Dalton gang in the 1890s. His neat suit and calm studio pose hide the reputation that made him one of the best-known outlaw figures of the late frontier era. In the summer of 1944, villagers in Lower Normandy gathered solemnly in a farm courtyard after American forces entered the area. 2 American soldiers watched from beside a mounted gun, showing how daily life and military control overlapped in the first days of liberation. In 1979, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat sat near the pyramids on a replica of Tutankhamun's golden throne. The image linked modern Egyptian leadership with one of the country's most famous ancient symbols, staged against the landscape known around the world. During the Petersburg Campaign in 1864, Union soldiers posed outside a rough forest shelter built for long months near the front. Barrels served as chimneys, and the log walkway helped them cross the camp mud after heavy rain. On June 23, 1944, Captain Raymond Walsh flew his Thunderbolt fighter low over France after striking an ammunition truck. His wingman's camera caught the aircraft as a dark shape against the blast, creating a rare airborne view of the Normandy campaign. At the Durag coal mines in Hungary in 1970, miners posed beside a narrow-gauge train used to move workers through the coal basin. The underground network was so large that electric personnel trains carried hundreds of men between the main shafts and the distant working faces before and after each shift. In Istanbul in 1910, street performers drew a crowd with music, a drum, and a trained bear on the cobblestones. Frederick Lewis captured a city scene where children watched closely and public entertainment filled the street before modern stages took over. In the 1890s in Nushagak, Alaska, a Yupik shaman performed a healing ritual for a sick boy while wearing a carved ceremonial mask and fur clothing. The photograph, preserved by the Library of Congress, shows how spiritual care, medicine, and community tradition met in one powerful Arctic scene. In 1962, a young woman stood on a small rail beside the Berlin Wall so she could speak to her mother on the East Berlin side. Her boyfriend held her steady, turning a family conversation into a quiet scene of separation in the divided city. In Venezuela in 1969, the man known as Papillon was photographed years after the prison escape story that made him famous. His book became a worldwide sensation, even though historians still debate how much of the story was truly his own life. In New York in 1928, a woman walked down the sidewalk with a goose on a leash as cars passed behind her. Ruth Jacoby captured a strange city moment where an ordinary walk looked more like a private performance in the middle of the street. In 2001, officers stood outside Andrea Yates's home in Houston after the deaths of her 5 children became a national case. Her first conviction was later overturned because of false expert testimony, leading to a new trial and a not guilty by reason of insanity verdict. In Deg village near Goris, a 106-year-old Armenian woman sat outside her home during the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. With a rifle across her lap, she became a stark image of how the fighting reached even the oldest people in border communities. At Camp Tyson in Tennessee during the Second World War, trainees raised a giant octopus-shaped barrage balloon from the ground. These balloons were used to block low-flying aircraft and protect key areas, turning the sky itself into a defensive obstacle. During the Second World War, German engineers tested the Krumlauf, a curved barrel attachment made to fire from behind cover. The strange device was produced in small numbers, but it wore out quickly and never became a practical battlefield tool. On October 31, 1952, the first American hydrogen device test produced this huge cloud over Eniwetok Atoll in the Marshall Islands. The blast was so powerful that it erased the small test island and marked a new stage in Cold War military technology. During the First World War, a man in Kersatz, Switzerland, posed on a motorcycle fitted with skis for travel across snow. The machine shows how early riders tested unusual winter transport before snowmobiles became common. Around 1904, 2 thylacines stood in their enclosure at the National Zoo in Washington, D.C. Often called Tasmanian tigers, these striped marsupials disappeared in 1936, making this photo a rare look at an animal no one can see alive today. Around 1905, black school children stood outside a segregated schoolhouse in Somerville, South Carolina. The simple wooden building and formal pose show a classroom world built under unequal rules, where education still carried deep meaning for every child in the line. In 1961, Donald Reed built the Reed Flying Submarine, a strange craft that could lift briefly into the air and also move underwater. To switch from flying to diving, its propeller was removed, the engine was covered, and the pilot needed breathing gear inside the tiny experimental machine. In Mexico in 1940, doctors treated Leon Trotsky after he was attacked by a Soviet security agent inside his own home. He passed away the next day, ending the exile of one of the Russian Revolution's most famous figures, far from the Soviet Union. In Romania in 1946, a Roma man used a trained bear in a traditional back treatment for a woman lying on the ground. People believed the animal's weight could help pain, making this photo a rare look at folk healing and post-war village life. In Kokand in 1923, Uzbekistan's first female tractor driver sat at the wheel while a crowd gathered around her. The photo shows how early Soviet modernization turned a tractor into a public symbol of women entering work once reserved for men. On September 12, 1960, floodwater covered a New York street so deeply that a man walked through it almost waist-high. Storefront signs, traffic lights, and a half-submerged car show how suddenly the city's normal rhythm disappeared underwater. This image is often presented as Mata Hari's final walk, but no confirmed photograph of her actual execution is known. The Dutch dancer and accused spy was put to death near Paris in 1917, and her name became one of the most famous legends of wartime espionage. On the set of Labyrinth in 1986, this scene was built with more than 100 latex hands fixed into a dark vertical wall. The practical effect made the helping hand sequence feel strange and physical, long before computer effects could create the same image. American soldiers packed materials into a hollow round for a 155mm gun, hoping to reach men cut off nearby. With bad weather stopping aircraft, they turned an artillery piece into an emergency delivery system. In September 1945, captured Japanese sailors from a Marshall Islands garrison were photographed after months cut off from steady supplies. Their fragile bodies show how island warfare could end in isolation, hunger, and surrender far from the main front. During the Armenian refugee crisis, crowds reached toward relief workers handing out bread from a vehicle. The raised hands show how one piece of food could become a lifeline for families forced from their homes during one of the darkest chapters of the early 20th century. On August 28, 1988, 3 Italian aerobatic aircraft collided during an air show at Ramstein Air Base in Germany. The photo caught the exact moment a precision display turned into one of the most remembered aviation accidents in modern airshow history. In July 1941 near Smederevska Palanka, this photograph became tied to the disputed story of Joseph Schultz, a German soldier later said to have refused an order against Yugoslav prisoners. Archives and later investigations say Schultz likely died in combat the day before, making the famous act of defiance more legend than proven history. In Cardiff in December 1960, firefighters trained with a chained rescue harness for lifting a person from a narrow underground opening. The scene looks harsh at first glance, but it was a safety drill meant to practice saving people trapped in tight spaces. In 1984, surgeons at Loma Linda used a baboon heart in an experimental transplant for newborn Stephanie Bauman, known as Baby Faye. She lived for 21 days, and the case became a worldwide debate about animal-to-human transplants, consent, and the limits of medicine. In the 1980s, secret United States radiation experiments came under public scrutiny after reports exposed tests done without clear consent. The story turned hidden government research into a national ethics scandal about trust, medicine, and human rights. In London in 1944, rescue teams searched through broken timber and dust after a V-1 flying bomb struck a residential street. The scene shows the terror of the flying bomb campaign, when ordinary homes could be torn open without warning while the front line was still far away. In China in 1946, women waited inside a narrow house connected to the city's red light district. The numbered rooms, hanging curtains, and silent poses show a hidden post-war world where poverty, control, and paid companionship met behind closed doors. This photo is often described as one of the last calm moments before the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami reached the shore. People still stand on the beach as the sea rises in the distance, making the ordinary holiday scene feel deeply unsettling. In Philadelphia in 1902, working children joined a public strike with signs asking for justice, shorter hours, and the chance to go to school. The photo is striking because the protest was led by children themselves, standing in work clothes and demanding the childhood that factory life had taken from them. In 1945, a Japanese special attack pilot at Chiron Air Base received a koi-shaped kite as a good luck charm before takeoff. The carp symbolized endurance and fortune, giving this quiet exchange a heavy meaning in the final months of the Pacific War. In 1939, Edward Easy Eddie O'Hare's damaged car stood in Chicago after the former Al Capone lawyer was attacked on the road. He had given testimony against Capone, making the crushed car a stark reminder of how dangerous loyalty and betrayal could be in the gangster era. In Tehran in 1979, a woman carrying a rifle stood over a crowded demonstration against Iraq. A banner behind her said, "Friends of yesterday had become enemies of today," capturing the sudden political break after the Iranian Revolution. On October 4, 1992, an El Al cargo plane hit apartment buildings in Amsterdam's Bijlmer district. The broken tower block and smoke-filled gap show how one aviation accident turned a quiet residential area into a national disaster scene. In Brazil, a prisoner spent 5 years digging a secret escape tunnel, believing it would finally lead him out of the prison. When he broke through the wall, the tunnel opened straight into the guard's room, turning years of hidden work into one of the strangest failed escape attempts ever photographed. In Seoul in 1963, a woman grabbed the matches from a monk who was preparing a public protest by fire. The photo captures the exact second a planned act of extreme protest was stopped, turning a political moment into a tense human struggle in front of witnesses. On October 2nd, 1920, King Alexander of Greece was bitten by a monkey while trying to protect his dog in the royal gardens of Totoi. 3 weeks later, he passed away from infection, and one small accident inside a palace garden suddenly changed the future of the Greek throne. In 1944, a French resistance fighter stood beside piles of shoes taken from Jewish prisoners at Natzweiler Struthof in eastern France. The single shoe in his hand made the scale personal, turning a storage room into quiet evidence of lives erased by the Nazi camp system. In May 1986, workers fenced off the ruined Unit 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. The broken reactor building shows the first emergency stage after the accident, before the massive shelter was built to seal the most dangerous part of the site. In the early 1900s, Mademoiselle Gabrielle from Basel, Switzerland, became known in European sideshows for her elegant stage image, despite being born without legs. Her portrait was carefully posed to show glamour first, making her one of the most recognizable performers of her unusual era. In England in 1930, London Zoo displayed the strange items found inside an ostrich's stomach, including coins, hooks, nails, cloth, rope, and small metal pieces. The carefully arranged collection shows how one curious zoo bird swallowed almost anything, turning its appetite into a bizarre scientific record. During the Iran-Iraq War, young Iranian boys were photographed moving at night with older fighters, carrying small packs and wearing oversized camouflage uniforms. Their size beside the adults makes the image especially unsettling, showing how a major conflict could pull children into military life before they were old enough to understand its full cost. In 1941, people in Moscow gathered on Sverdlov Square to look at a German aircraft brought down over the capital. The crowd around the wreck shows how the war in the sky quickly became a public reality on the streets below. This World War I veteran wears a custom facial prosthetic designed to restore a more natural appearance after a serious wartime injury. The painted mask and special glasses show how artists and doctors work together to help wounded soldiers return to public life with dignity. In New York in March 1940, Ruth Scott modeled a beauty mask that warmed the face and was promoted as a way to tone the skin. The brass covers on her fingers were nail protectors, making the whole demonstration look like a strange preview of future beauty technology. In Iran in 1977, women sat openly in a hair salon during the last years before the revolution changed public life. After 1979, compulsory hijab rules made this ordinary salon scene feel like a rare look at a very different Iran. By 1943, Stalingrad had been reduced to a vast field of broken streets, burned buildings, and empty blocks after months of urban fighting. From the air, the city looked less like a place where people had lived and more like a map of total wartime destruction. In 1953, a Los Angeles police detective modeled a strange mask linked to Baxter Shorter and the Mabel Monahan case. The mask was later found at Shorter's sister's home, after his testimony against the group made him a target in one of the city's most notorious crime stories. During the First World War, German engineers tested a huge early flamethrower, so heavy that several men had to move it together. Its size, fragile parts, and unstable fuel system made it almost as dangerous for its own crew as for anyone in front of it. At Narva in 1944, this soldier survived after a round struck his helmet and passed just above his head. The damaged steel helmet became a quiet record of a few centimeters that separated an ordinary frontline moment from a very different ending. In 1982, Pablo Escobar appeared at the opening of a football field built with his own money. The photos show how he used public gifts, sport, and local crowds to present himself as a benefactor while building power far beyond the stadium. In late 1940s New Orleans, burlesque performer Kitty West, known as Evangeline the Oyster Girl, smashed the glass tank used in a rival's underwater stage act. At first, it looks like a rescue from a failed trick, But the real story was a backstage feud that spilled into the middle of the show.
In 1856, frontier showman John "Grizzly" Adams posed with one of the bears that made him famous across the American West. He captured and trained grizzlies for public shows, but one encounter left him with a serious head injury that followed him for the rest of his life. On December 11, 1963, the teenage son of a famous American singer was photographed moments after being released by his captors. The case became even stranger when it was reported that the men had first considered another celebrity's son, then rejected the idea as too un-American. In the 1970s, a bullfighter lay in a hospital bed after a dangerous ring performance, with a woman sitting beside him in silence. The photo shows the hidden cost behind the spectacle when applause ended and the risk became painfully personal. In May 1945, former Dachau prisoners reached the border of Liechtenstein and were met by frontier guards instead of more orders. Their striped uniforms and cautious smiles show the first fragile moments of freedom after years inside the Nazi camp system. At the Stara Gradiška concentration camp, mothers and children were held inside the Kula Tower under the Ustasha regime. The bare floor, crowded room, and children sitting beside their mothers show a quiet record of family suffering during the Second World War. On November 10, 1865, Henry Wirtz stood on the platform in Washington after being convicted for his command of Andersonville Prison. The case became infamous because about 13,000 Union prisoners died there from hunger, disease, and poor conditions, making Wirtz the only Confederate official put to death after the Civil War. On August 26, 1944, Parisians celebrating the Allied entry into the city suddenly scattered across Place de la Concorde. Even after the German surrender in Paris, hidden gunmen still remained in nearby buildings, turning Liberation Day into a tense street scene. On April 14, 1944, a German submariner from U-448 was pulled aboard the Canadian warship HMCS Swansea after his submarine was lost in the Atlantic. His face shows the shock of survival, caught between the end of an undersea patrol and the beginning of captivity. In the early 1900s, Scotland Yard stored fingerprint and police records in rows of numbered paper files instead of computer databases. The image shows how investigators searched criminal records by hand, turning walls of paper into one of Britain's most important tools for identification. In 1913, prisoners in Mongolia were photographed outside a rough wooden prison building with heavy chains fixed around one man's legs. The low doorway, dirt yard, and visible restraints show how harsh and basic prison conditions could be in the last years of the old imperial era. In Esteli in 1979, an M4 Sherman tank of the Nicaraguan National Guard moved through the streets during the Nicaraguan Revolution. The old Second World War-era tank looked out of place beside the small buildings, showing how heavy military force entered ordinary neighborhoods. In Brest-Litovsk in 1939, German and Soviet officers shook hands after the joint occupation of eastern Poland. The photo became one of the clearest images of the short-lived Nazi-Soviet cooperation before the two powers turned against each other. Near Van, in 1916, Armenian resistance fighters held a rough trench line against a high earthen wall. The rifles, close positions, and exposed ground show how local defense could depend on small groups fighting from improvised cover. In German-occupied Kutno, Poland, in 1939, a woman smiled from behind barbed wire during the first months of occupation. The contrast between her expression and the fence makes the photo unsettling, showing how ordinary faces were caught inside a rapidly closing wartime world. In 1971, more than 50,000 people filled the streets of Fribourg for the funeral of Swiss racing driver Joe Siffert. His Porsche 917 led the procession with a black band, honoring a driver who won 14 World Endurance Championship races. On February 22, 1656, Jewish settlers in New Amsterdam received permission to buy a small piece of land outside the city for a burial ground. The petition from Congregation Shereth Israel marked one of the earliest known Jewish cemetery rites in what later became New York. This marble throne belonged to Queen Eurydice, the first of Macedon, mother of Philip II and grandmother of Alexander the Great. It was found in her tomb at Vergina in 1987, linking one royal burial to the family that changed ancient Greek history. In the Ossola region during the Second World War, soldiers of the Italian fascist Black Brigade Augusto Cristina were photographed in the field. The unit's pennant, shown in the next slide, connected them to one of the armed groups used by the Italian Social Republic in its final phase. On February 22, 1967, Operation Junction City began in South Vietnam to ease pressure on Saigon and strike Viet Cong bases near the Cambodian border. It became one of the largest United States operations of the war, combining airborne troops, helicopters, armor, and ground forces across Tai Ninh province. In Berlin in 1939, Adolf Hitler visited the International Automobile Exhibition and stopped to examine a vehicle wheel up close. The photo shows how Nazi Germany used modern cars, industry, and public displays to project power just months before the Second World War began. In Alabama in 1983, 79-year-old Robert Chambliss stood in prison after his conviction in the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing case. The long-delayed trial became a symbol of justice, arriving years after 4 young girls died. On February 22, 1948, 3 truck bombs exploded on Ben Yehuda Street in Jerusalem during the final months of the British Mandate. The attack left 58 people dead and up to 200 injured, turning one of the city's busy streets into a major flashpoint before the war widened. The Arado 234 Blitz was the world's first operational jet bomber, seen here airborne with its clean, advanced shape. Its tricycle landing gear and pressurized cockpit made it one of the most modern aircraft designs used by Germany in the Second World War. Around 1930, during the Great Depression, a man stood in public with a sign saying, "Work is what I want." The message was simple but powerful because millions of Americans were not asking for comfort, but for a chance to earn money and survive with dignity. Buck Barrow, Clyde Barrow's older brother, and his wife Blanche became part of the Barrow Gang during the Great Depression. Their story was not just outlaw legend, but a short, desperate life on the run that ended with Buck dead and Blanche sent to prison. On July 25, 1981, 14-year-old Stacey Arris vanished in Yosemite National Park after a horseback ride with her father and others. Searchers found only the lens cap from her camera, leaving her disappearance one of Yosemite's most unsettling unsolved cases. In the black water, a great white shark appears from the darkness, with only its pale body and open mouth catching the light. The empty background makes the animal look even larger, turning a deep ocean photograph into a truly unsettling close encounter. In this 1970s lineup photo, Ted Bundy stands second from the right among several men presented for identification. The plain police setting makes the image especially chilling because one of America's most notorious criminals appears almost ordinary in the row. In Japan in 1944, a young boy posed beside his father, a Japanese special attack pilot, before one of the final wartime missions. The child's small smile beside the uniform makes the photo deeply heavy, showing how family life stood next to a duty that often meant no return. On March 17, 1945, this aerial view of Iwo Jima showed landing craft, transports, and warships supporting the United States Marine advance from the beaches. Tanks moved across the rough island toward the airfield, showing the enormous scale of one of the Pacific War's hardest battles. On Christmas Eve 1971, 17-year-old Julianne Kopka survived a fall into the Peruvian rainforest after her plane broke apart during a storm. Injured and alone, she walked through the Amazon for 11 days before rescue, becoming the only survivor while 91 others did not make it out. In 1931, Mahatma Gandhi visited Darwin in Lancashire, England, where textile workers gathered to greet him. The The meeting was powerful because many local mills had suffered from India's boycott of British cloth, yet workers still came to see the man behind it. John Slater listened closely to the deep tone of a 4-foot 6-inch tenor bell made for Westminster Abbey at the Whitechapel Bell Foundry. Founded in 1570 and closed in 2017, the foundry carried centuries of London bell-making history inside one workshop. On November 26, 1941, Japan's carrier strike force left northern Japan for the secret voyage toward Pearl Harbor. The ships carried hundreds of aircraft across the Pacific, beginning the naval operation that would bring the United States into the Second World War. In The People of the Abyss, Jack London described the East End of London as a place where poverty could be seen only minutes from the city's wealth. His words turned the streets, alleys, and crowded brick houses into a sharp record of urban hardship in early 20th century England. In London in 1902, people without shelter slept under Tower Bridge, using the stone arches as cover from the night. The photo shows the harsh poverty described by Jack London, where one of the city's great landmarks stood directly above people with nowhere safe to sleep. On April 15, 1912, Titanic survivors were brought aboard Carpathia after the rescue ship reached the lifeboats in the cold North Atlantic. This photograph shows a rope ladder being fixed from a lifeboat to Carpathia, capturing one of the first fragile steps from disaster to survival. In February 1945, sailors fought fires aboard United States ship Saratoga after a Japanese special attack off Iwo Jima. The burning deck shows how even a massive aircraft carrier could become a survival scene within seconds during one of the hardest battles of the Pacific War. In late 1917, Italian Arditi of the 1st Shock Battalion trained at Strica di Manzano for raids across the front line. These assault troops practiced fast attacks, close movement, and trench fighting, becoming one of Italy's most feared specialist units of the First World War. This group portrait shows baby Irene Harris, Big Bertha Curtis, Bonnie Jean Murdoch, Mary Rose Perry, and baby Ruth Pontico posed like a tiny stage family. Their carefully arranged costumes and nicknames point to the old sideshow world, where performers built public identities that audiences remembered more than their real lives. In 1944, Belgrade was hit by Allied air raids, including British aircraft, while the city was still under German occupation. The damage showed how liberation could arrive with a heavy price, as civilians lived between occupation forces and bombs from the sky. On February 25, 1926, Dr. J. Gresham Machen opposed the Curtis Bill before a joint congressional committee in Washington. He warned that a national education department could push schools toward central control, turning a technical law into a major fight over local freedom and public education. In May 1964, a British paratrooper set up a belt-fed machine gun on a rocky ridge in the Radfan Mountains during the Aden emergency. The unusually short shorts were part of Britain's hot climate field dress, making the image look almost unreal beside the harsh mountain battlefield. In March 1943, Trinidad Gutierrez and Molly Alcanto worked as suppliers at the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad Roundhouse in San Bernardino, California. Jack Delano photographed them replacing oil cans and lamps on steam locomotives, doing wartime railroad work that had usually been assigned to men. In 1901, this photograph recorded one of the earliest known uses of the two-finger gesture as an insult. Long before it became a peace sign, the same hand signal could mean open disrespect, like a silent insult aimed straight at the camera. In February 1943, Norwegian commandos trained by Britain crossed the frozen mountains to attack the German heavy water plant at Vemork in Norway. Operation Gunnerside destroyed key equipment without a direct fight, slowing Germany's nuclear research with one of the most daring sabotage missions of the Second World War. In December 1994, Chechen women prayed in the cold, asking that Russian troops would not advance on Grozny. Their raised hands and anxious faces show how the First Chechen War reached civilians before the city became the center of a devastating battle. In February 1959, a member of the Dyatlov Pass expedition rested inside a snow shelter during the group's trek through the northern Ural Mountains. The calm winter scene feels haunting today because the trip soon became one of the Soviet Union's most famous unsolved mountain mysteries. In Cologne in 1944, Soviet forced laborer Ivan Olenek was photographed with an identification board at a German chemical factory. His worn clothing and numbered signs show how millions of Eastern European civilians were turned into controlled wartime labor inside Nazi Germany. This image does not match the claimed caption about Catherine Hunt opening the oyster season in Colchester in 1925. The modern sports jacket and indoor office setting suggest a much later scene, so using that story with this photo would immediately look false. In 1937, Japanese soldiers guarded a section of the Great Wall of China during the early phase of the Second Sino-Japanese War. The flag on the ancient wall shows a striking clash of eras, with one of China's oldest defenses standing under a modern military occupation. Write in the comments, which photo did you like the most?